And so,
Sorry,
when
I just have to jump in. There was a second button I needed to hit to start the record, and I didn't hit it, so it started recording 23 seconds ago, and I
okay,
apologize.
well, let's start it all over again.
Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Too Many Leagues, a Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast brought to you by the Once Upon a Sunday Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek Thomas, and I'm joined by Aaron Spires. Aaron, how are you doing? How's your season going so far?
Well, strikes and gutters so far. Like the name says, I'm in too many leagues, and as a result of that, I've had some pretty fantastic starts. But I've had some pretty poor starts, especially with the rash of injuries that we've seen so far this year.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm really looking forward to kind of talking through some of those scenarios over the course of the episode, and kind of trying to work through maybe what I should do, but also what other people can do to get through it.
yeah. Let's get to the bottom of what to do about those injuries. We'll do that in a little bit, but yeah. So the idea behind this podcast, I mean, Aaron and I, we are admittedly in too many fantasy leagues, specifically dynasty leagues. I don't want to. I mean, there are dozens of leagues between the two of us, and we're hoping that that large sample size of leagues, all that experience, all of those failures, successes, we're hoping we can condense that into some pretty good fantasy advice to help you win dynasty leagues or get started in dynasty if it's something you've always wanted to do. So if you've never played in a dynasty league, hopefully we can kind of lower that learning curve, make you feel more comfortable with it. Or if you're a dynasty veteran, hopefully we can give you advice that will take a kind of middling team and make it that multi-year dynasty that you're looking to have. Yeah, we just love dynasty. It's what I love about it is there's always something to do, right? You can always kind of tinker with your team and get better any time of year. And that's why it's great.
Yeah, it's those multi-year kind of plans that you can set up, right? It's a year by year game, absolutely, and I think that sometimes we forget that. Sean Siegel and Ben Gretsch often kind of talk about how it's a 1 year game, more than we think that it is, and I think that's important. But even within that, we are looking medium and longer term so that we can try and create those super teams that, at the end of the day, create really, I mean, a dynasty, right?
Yeah.
Where we can win year in, year out, and have the bragging rights over our friends, and hopefully make a little bit of money at the same time as well.
That's right. Yeah. And it opens the door to look at players in a different way. Like if you have Travis Kelce on your redraft team, you don't have to worry about whether or not he's going to retire at the end of the year. You know that if he retires, that's okay. You just won't draft him next year. Whereas in Dynasty, you might be stuck holding all those Travis Kelce bags that you have that you can't get rid of because he's not performing and he is at the tail end of his career. Just not to pick on Travis Kelce, but that's just an example. And the other thing is, I have a lot of redraft leagues where we're 3 weeks in, and those teams are dead, just dead. If you drafted Christian McCaffrey early, if you got Debo later, if you got Puka Nacua, and you were really counting on those guys, and it's just not been a good first 3 weeks. Dynasty, you still have those guys. They have value regardless of whether or not they're playing right now. So we hope to walk you through some of that. But I think that segues perfectly into talking about what on earth do we do with all these injuries? Cooper Kupp missing multiple weeks, Christian McCaffrey, Keenan Allen, Deebo Samuel, Hollywood Brown, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Tua, which he has 2 wide receivers tied to him. JJ McCarthy's out for the year. I mean, it's a pretty long list of guys with injury concerns. Kenneth Walker's another one. So how do we approach kind of dealing with that in a dynasty format? Do we see buying opportunities? Are there selling opportunities? How are you handling those things, Aaron?
Well, the answer that nobody likes to hear, but I think is important to say, is that it depends. And I think that with everything dynasty related, it's team specific and context specific. I like to bucket players as best I can, and in this case, I see a few buckets that we can kind of split people into. The first of those being career arc buckets. right? You have the Kupps and the McCaffreys and the Keenan Allens, even Debo's that are, towards the end of at least the historical uh, age arc and cliff of their careers. And then you have, people like AJ Brown, who might be in the peak of his productive years, or a Puka who is, ascendant, hopefully, or somebody like Tua who is maybe somewhere in between. And so, kind of trying to bucket those people first, I think, is the first thing that I would do, and then it is injury specific as well, right? Um, so I like to take a look at what is the prognosis within the year, right? And a good contrast. Let's take a look at, say, somebody like Cooper Kupp and somebody like somebody like CMC. Um, Somebody like Cooper Kupp, as best we can tell, they chose not to put him on IR. It's unclear how long he's going to be out. Could be 3 or 4 weeks. Somebody like CMC is on his way to Germany for what I have heard through the ether of the internet, may be a specialist that helps with stem cells so that the Achilles can get enough blood to the area to heal faster, and that his injury could take him out towards the end of the season. Those are different situations for you, and in the first case with Kupp, you can't do anything but hold. I mean, I suppose you could sell. You might be able to, if I could get a second round pick for Cooper Kupp, I would do it in a moment, I'd say. But I'm not sure how many people are willing to pay a second for him. And if they are, it's going to be a late second for sure. And so in most cases, I'm probably holding there, and then hoping that I get the comeback and get at least a couple usable games, because depending on how the splits work and when Puka comes back, I mean, we did see that he was ready to be a workhorse. He was ready to take the volume like he had in 2021, right? So
Yeah, he won
whereas
weeks for people. At the
21
start of the
targets,
season.
was that
Yeah.
what it was? It was.
Yeah, it was a lot like Puka last year. The first couple weeks where Puka was getting the 20 targets. So whoever's in that role, it seems like, if they're going to have the high volume passing attack, is going to get a lot of targets. Do you see a buying opportunity at all with Kupp? If someone's trying to move on, that's kind of the flip side of these injuries. Is it's obviously very risky, but if you feel like maybe you're a piece away, you could get this guy coming back in a couple weeks. Are you interested in that at all?
So I'm not. I and it you know and it's there's a lot of different ways for folks to play Dynasty. The way that I generally prefer to play is through younger wide receivers. I'm not inclined to have some of my future assets go out the door for a player that I'm at best getting this season, maybe next season, for. And so if he's out there and somebody's shopping him, sure, I'll give you a third round pick, but nobody's going to take that, right? Because that's an insult. Right. He's an incredible player, obviously, right?
Yeah.
It's just in terms of it's an asset that's going to depreciate on my squad, for one that I know is going to appreciate considerably over the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because I mean, you look at where Cooper Kupp is in his career arc, and his value in terms of trade value is only going to descend from here. It's definitely not going to rise by a lot. So you're kind of buying what it is now at the price it is now, and it's going to, you're not going to be able to offload it for higher than what you're getting at, if that's your goal. If your goal is to maybe have a guy that you can plug into your flex later in the year and you can get a really good deal, that's an option. Kupp specifically, I'm probably not doing that this year though. CMC is a guy I've seen traded a ton in my various leagues for just wildly differing values. Kind of valued. I've seen him valued at like a second. I've seen him as part of like a bigger deal. People just trying to offload and people trying to take a chance. Are you seeing that also? And should people, is that, we're talking about like a 28, 29-year-old running back that is now dealing with an Achilles issue. Is that an advisable thing to do at this point, in your opinion? The same sort of thing as Kupp, or do you see CMC a little differently?
So I wouldn't be buying for anything more than a second. And you're not going to get him, I think, for that price. I think CMC could come back and bury me both this year and next year. I feel far more confident in that than I do with somebody like Cooper Kupp. But, let's take a look. Let's say let's say CMC. Would you trade CMC for Jonathan Brooks?
No.
You'd rather have the Brooks
I'd
side?
rather have Brooks. Yeah.
What about Kenneth Walker?
I have feelings on Kenneth Walker. That's closer for me than the Brooks deal.
Kyren Williams?
Kyron's tough because my opinion's kind of changed on him since the beginning of the season, but I think you're kind of hitting that. That's Kenneth Walker, Kyren Williams. I wouldn't move those guys for him. That's definitely like where I'm uncomfortable with the price. And then you get a little bit below that though. We can start talking about another guy who's injured, Isaiah Pacheco. He's probably, we kind of know more about his injury. He's going to be out. He's expected to be out. I think it was like 9 weeks from the injury or something like that, maybe longer. Maybe
let's write him off for the season.
We could write him off for the season. But I would expect him to kind of have a few more effective years in the future than CMC will. So it's that's a little more of like a, if I could see trades with both those guys happening, even though they're both kind of in murky situations where they're dealing with injuries. But that's all to get to. That's kind of where I value CMC right now and going forward in terms of like my dynasty ranks, is he's kind of in that range for me of guys where coming into the season, before we knew to the extent that this injury was happening, he was like a top 5 running back in dynasty, even at his age. In my ranks, I had him, he's probably dropped now, but I still have him at 7 right now. He's probably more in that 15, 16 range for me. So you're looking at guys like Joe Mixon, Rashad White. That's kind of where I would value him in terms of a trade. So if I can get him at the same price, I would get one of those guys. Absolutely. I think I would do it. But like you said, it's team specific. It's situation specific. It's what your goal is for this season.
Yeah, I think I put him, I recently redid my ranks and I've got him right around RB10. And that, that's in the Walker, Brooks, that area, James Cook, all in that area. Although Cook is obviously a riser over the start of the season.
We might talk about him a little more later because that offense has been high flying in a way that we hoped it would.
Absolutely. So it's just, but with CMC, it's, I'm not willing to drop him into that middle of the RB2 range yet. I still have him as an RB1 simply because if he does come back, he really could just bury us with 25, 26 points per game in a PPR format. And that's so valuable. That upside is one of 4 running backs, I think, that we probably would say have that. And so, it's hard to drop him too far. But again, that's why I sell or I hold.
Yeah.
I don't think that I'm buying. I'm hoping that somebody else, if somebody offered me a first for CMC on my bench as he's injured, I'm taking it right now though.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
much any random first I'll take.
Well, and a lot of teams with CMC are probably not doing off to, great starts because he's kind of the anchor of a lot of teams. I have him, and I think I may have mentioned this already, but in both my dynasty and redraft leagues combined, I have him in a quarter of my leagues, which is my highest owned player. So cards can be sent to my address, sympathy cards for just the poor performance that I'm seeing from roughly a quarter of my fantasy football teams. So yeah, those are kind of the aging older guys. What about the younger guys? What about a guy like Puka Nacua? He's sitting on someone's IR right now. AJ Brown, who knows when he's going to come back? Is he coming? He's not, definitely not. I don't know if he's been ruled out this week yet, but it's going to be a multi-week injury. What about guys like that? Guys on the younger side of their careers. How are you handling those situations?
So I handle them slightly differently, say Puka and AJ Brown. Puka Nacua is a buying opportunity for me. I still have him at the kind of uh, bottom end of wide receiver one territory in my ranks, although there's this kind of large middle of, maybe 10 or so wide receivers that I think are roughly similar in terms of how I'm viewing them. Uh, I think I would be putting out feelers to league mates if I'm in a situation where I'm competitive, but I can weather a bit of a storm. I'd be willing to certainly move a future first for Puka, maybe a first and a second for him. I don't think that he gets into that kind of next tier up where you might have somebody like I don't know, like for me, like an Amon Ra or something like that, where I'd be paying a little bit more. But again, until Malik Neighbors says otherwise, it's the greatest rookie season by a wide receiver we've ever seen. And so, I still think that's a good buying opportunity, and you might be able to entice somebody to take a future pick if their seasoning isn't going well. Maybe they've been bit by the injury bug, and they've seen how the Rams offense has been throughout the course of the year. So, I'd definitely be looking to buy Nakua any chance that I could, to right some past wrongs for missing on him throughout the rookie draft last year. Whereas somebody like AJ Brown, I think he's probably more of a hold for me. Um, I'm not looking to sell him because nobody's going to give me what I think he's actually worth when he's on the field.
Right.
Um, and I don't think that I'm willing to pay the price that people would want for him either. There's like that group of receivers that you'll see, and even when he's hurt, and they're not sure if he's going to play this upcoming week, but it's still week to week, so I'm assuming not. I think it's a hamstring injury, and um, but he's in that kind of group of receivers. People like him, like uh, maybe like a Tank Dell. That, and I think AJ Brown is much better than Tank Dell, but like
Sure.
a Zay Flowers, Jaden Reed, where even if I like the players, and I liked all the players that I just named there, you can't. It's hard to get somebody on the other side of a trade to part with them for less than a bit of an overpay,
Yeah.
and I'm not willing to kind of do that for those players.
Yeah.
I think that unless there's some kind of historic outliers, they're going to be roughly in that same kind of middle 10 wide receivers that I just talked about. I don't see them shooting up in terms of becoming the next dynasty wide receiver 3 or 4.
Right.
especially when you have, folks like Chase and Jefferson and Lamb and Neighbors and
Yeah.
Harrison and right. So and so AJ Brown I think is similar in that he's just outside of that, and I don't think that he's going to be able to climb up to it, especially because you
Mhm.
also have the slight age concerns. Not really, but 26, 27 rather than
Yeah. Sure.
22, 23, 24.
Yeah.
So
And he's a very
yeah, for me
physical
he's more of a
player.
hold.
He's a very physical player
Absolutely.
too. So I mean that it's a little different. It's interesting with AJ Brown. I feel like there was a buying opportunity because I think people were really freaked out about how last season ended, where he got off to just such an amazing, like almost historically great start. I mean, he was putting up. From week 4 to week 9, he went wide receiver 1, 13, 7, 2, 3, and 7, and then I think he was a wide receiver one time the rest of the season. So I think there was a buying window, ironically. And then
Yeah.
that all closed when he played extremely well in that primetime game in Brazil against Green Bay. He had 119 yards and a touchdown, including a 67-yard touchdown. And you could just hear the grip of AJ Brown rosterers just tightening on him. So I do unfortunately feel like a buying window closed. And then because imagine he kind of comes out and he's like wide receiver 30 that week, and then he misses 2 weeks. I think you're looking at a totally different scenario with AJ Brown right now. I think you might be able to buy low on him, unfortunately, or I guess fortunately. I want players to do well, but I think that closed. But yeah, they have a bye week 5. There's almost no chance he plays this week, but maybe week 6 he can get back out there. Back to talking about Puka. I'm going to pitch a made up scenario here. If a team in your league had Christian McCaffrey and Puka Nacua, which a lot of teams do, a lot of my teams do, and that team is really needy for a running back, what running backs do you think you could build an offer around to get Puka Nacua back? Are there any guys that you think could be, rather than trading picks, could you trade a running back to a running back needy team to get Puka Nacua? But do you have any guys that you think might be in a range to pull that off?
So I think, yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at it, you might be able to do a Kyron
Mm.
for some people, right? I mean, he's still getting 90+% of the snaps. He's getting
Yeah.
all of the red zone touches, even with like poor efficiency last week. What did he scored 3, right? I mean, he's being used the way that they said he was going to be used. Blake Corum is a figment of everybody's imagination. Um, so James Cook is another one. Again, like I think that this
Yeah.
is, and I like to build, and I think James Cook is a good player. I have him on a number of teams, but I also think overall, he's a size outlier in
Mm.
terms of workload. I'm unsure if he's going to hold up multiple seasons, and if I have depth at the position, um, then somebody like a James Cook, I think you could probably sell high on for somebody like a Puka Nacua. Um, I think that the Nakua owner would be, or the Nakua manager would be probably tempted by one of those two. That those would be
Yeah.
the ones. Like I still have decent belief in um, Jonathan Taylor, and
Mm.
so I I might be a bit higher than market. I'm not sure. Like I've got him. Oh, where do I have him now? I've
I
got
have
him. Yeah, I've got him as my RB5.
I have him. I mean, I haven't updated my ranks in a bit, but I had him 3. Because I mean I think he's great, and he's looked great so far this season. So um,
So, but he's, so somebody, and the way that that offense is running, he's getting so much of the work, and
yeah,
I think that they're actually going to have to rely on him more
yep,
as they develop Anthony Richardson. And so, I think I would probably want more on top of Puka for Jonathan Taylor. Uh,
hmm sure,
and if I had Saquon Barkley, um, I am. riding with Saquon Barkley this year, unless I'm getting a pretty big overpay.
Yeah.
If before the season, if I had an opportunity to trade Saquon Barkley for Puka Nacua, I would have done it, and I would have been
Yeah.
wrong on results at the very least. But
Right. Right.
my process would have said, "See you later" to Saquon.
Yeah. He was
So
another player there was a lot of fear about going into that Philly offense. And it's seemed unfounded at least through 3 weeks. But
so I mean, so yeah, I think like a Cook or a Kyren Williams is kind of where I would be. Otherwise, I'd be looking at, you know, maybe a lesser receiver coupled with, like a middle of the road RB2, you know, if they needed somebody and they were willing to take, like I'm just trying to think who might be, but uh, like an Alvin Kamara
hmm,
plus, right?
yeah.
Kind of sell high on Alvin Kamara, who's looked great, but
Yeah.
again, I don't build my rosters that way, and I'd much rather try and shift my value from the very fragile uh,
Yeah.
asset that is Alvin Kamara to what I
Yeah.
assume will be a less fragile asset in Puka Nacua.
Yeah. I traded Alvin Kamara literally 4 hours too early this season. I traded him, and then later that afternoon, he went for 4 touchdowns, came back, had another good game this past week. So that's unfortunate. But I like the first name. He's like Kyren Williams, and that's interesting because he's like tied to Puka in a way where his rushing volume went way up now that there aren't any healthy pass catchers in LA. He ran the ball for 24 times against San Francisco this past week. And he caught another he caught 2 passes on 2 targets. So wasn't a huge factor in the passing game, but they really didn't throw a lot. And I think that is a function of Puka and Cooper Kupp not being in there. So once Puka comes back, not only is that going to obviously be good for the asset you just acquired in Puka Nacua, but it's going to probably squash down the volume that Kyren Williams sees. So that was an interesting one right off the top. And I actually saw those two get traded for each other at least once last season. So it's definitely something that at least last season people were willing to do. The narrative's changed on Kyren Williams a little bit this year, and it was a lot that had to do with Blake Corum, who, like you said, figment of our imaginations, apparently. Not really factoring in the first 3 weeks.
But what about for you? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
thinking of injured players, like there's a couple of quarterbacks we had mentioned, which is like
Mm-hmm.
Tua and JJ McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
Different issues, but affecting them both. But how are you approaching kind of injured quarterbacks?
So McCarthy's kind of easy because I think you kind of just treat him like a 2025 first at this point. Because I think he's still probably valued there. I don't think much has changed even with the injury. It's just
What about Darnold?
he's kind of sitting. Yeah, I would find it. I mean, I obviously may knock it down a little bit, but I would find it shocking if Sam Darnold is the starting quarterback for the Vikings next year, even with how well he's played so far. I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out. Obviously, I could be totally wrong, and Sam Darnold's a guy I really like and have in a lot of leagues. But it's just that doesn't. I don't think you draft JJ McCarthy and then have Sam Darnold just come in and take that job, and JJ McCarthy never see the field. Again, could be very naive of me. We'll see what happens. So to me, JJ McCarthy, not a lot's changed. I look at him as a fungible asset that you can kind of treat as a first next year. Tua, now that's a whole thing. Like, he's on IR now, correct?
He is, yeah.
He's at least missing 3 more games. And then who knows after that? Like, who knows if he plays again this year? I haven't seen a ton of stuff coming out of Miami with what his plans are, and that, it affects us on a game, for this game. But like, obviously I hope he takes care of himself and does what's right for him. But that's not if someone will trade me for him, I will absolutely listen to trading him away. I don't have him in a ton of leagues, but he's not a guy I'm really like going for just because I don't like the murkiness of that situation. You could be trading for a guy who the number of games that he plays and is effective for you could be extremely low. So it's a huge gamble because you could be getting a top 10 quarterback. And if you're in a super flex league, that is extremely valuable. But you could also be getting nothing, literally nothing. So
yeah,
there aren't a ton of, it's kind of a unique situation because you don't see a lot of guys that are kind of entering their prime where they take an injury and you're just kind of waiting to see if they even come back. But if that is within the amount of risk you're willing to take on and you're getting a pretty good deal on a guy who's proven that he can be a QB1 week in and week out, I mean, I hope that works out for you. But
I mean, like in terms of a random pick, what would you pay for Tua right now?
It's gonna sound, I mean, it's low enough where no one would accept it. I would say I'd be fine giving up if I knew a second was going to be like mid to late. I think I'd be okay with that because I'm kind of looking at that as like, in terms of like where quarterbacks were valued this past year, it's kind of like the Michael Penix territory. But I don't want to do that. I don't even want to do that. Honestly, that's just like the most like reasonable thing I could think of. That isn't. It's just such a difficult situation to kind of, try to predict. If I had a bunch of picks and I could kind of eat one of them and the other person would do it, sure, I would take that on for maybe like a second. I don't know though. That I don't know if that's too high or too low. Honestly, it's just it could be either. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I have a lot of exposure to Tua, just because of the offense, and he was inexpensive in drafts, especially in startups, coming off of the multiple concussion season that he had a couple of years back now, and so. I think your valuation is probably somewhere. I think we're probably somewhere in line. I'd probably pay a bit more than a second, but a bit less than a first, right? Maybe 2 seconds, maybe a second and a third, depending on what it is. Again, if I have a bunch of picks, he's certainly worth. He's certainly worth a first if he plays another season.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All indications are that he wants to play again this year. That week 7, I think, is the first time that he can. Right, the first time that he's eligible is week 7. The question is, will that actually come to pass? Right, and so. If you wait, though, for another 2 weeks, you're going to have the information. And, your buying windows happen during times of uncertainty. And so, if you're looking to maybe, make a tidy profit on your investment, you have to do it now, I think. That all that said, because I have so much of them, I'm nervous about overexposing my portfolio, right? So, but talking through it, I might end up actually throwing out a few offers for Tua just to see if anything gets accepted.
Offers for Tua? Yeah.
Yeah. I might actually.
As we've been having this conversation, you make a great point. Like, if you have the information in 2024, your opponent has the information. Like, so, uncertainty is going to be the situation, is going to be the time where we just talked about AJ Brown, like how that buying window closed when he had a great primetime game. It's the same thing. If a good report comes out this afternoon that Tua will definitely play week 7, you probably still have a discount because people are worried about that next hit, but it's not going to be what it is now, where there's legitimate concern that he might not play to the level that he was.
Yeah, there's another person that is similar, and I just it made me think of it
Oh,
just in terms of uncertainty, and I just want to mention it.
sure.
Is if there is somebody in your league, and generally we're talking about superflex leagues, PPR, tight end premium. That's what we play most often, I'd say. But like, but if there are people if there's somebody in your league that is doing well, is definitely on the contender side of things, um, and has but also has Jonathan Brooks sitting
Mhm.
there, and you can fill a hole for them to bolster their roster. I think now is the time to be buying Jonathan Brooks. This is probably the last buying
It's
window.
it is today and tomorrow, basically. Yeah, you
Pretty
pretty
close.
much need to get it in, like, because I mean, are there any indications he won't play week 5? Or is he coming off the pup and ready to go week 5?
I mean,
Or
it would be surprising. There's no indications one way or the other yet. I mean, he's
yeah,
eligible obviously to come and play week 5. Uh, that'd be 10 months removed from his injury. So that's right about on time. I mean, they might ramp him up slowly,
right,
but if what we saw this past week is any indication about what the offense can be with a functional quarterback,
right,
then and I like Chuba Hubbard. He is from where I live, so but he's not a superstar, right? He
right,
he he had some buzz for a year and a half in college, and then kind of faded, and he's become a solid NFL
yeah,
running back, but he's not to the talent level of a Jonathan Brooks.
right,
And they drafted him with a second round pick.
yeah,
And so this is potentially the last chance that you have to buy on him.
yeah. That's a good call
At
out. Yeah,
probably below the price, right? Because like we were
yeah,
saying, we would value him over CMC in terms of our dynasty ranks.
right.
Um, but
Yeah,
once he
that's a
comes
good.
back and plays,
It's over once he sees the field. Yeah, so that's a good call out, and yeah, he's eligible to come off the pup list this week or after this week. So, well, that'll be something to watch. So now let's talk about something completely different than injuries, and we'll just kind of go through this quickly. But guys that from the start of the season to now have really risen, their value has skyrocketed this year. And then we'll talk about some guys that have had the opposite happen, where you were really looking forward to these guys. Maybe you traded for them in the off season, and now they're not even the starting quarterback of their team anymore. That kind of gives away who one of them is. But let's talk about the risers first, because that's more fun. I think a big one is Rashee Rice. He's really ascended to becoming the number one option in Kansas City. It helps that Hollywood Brown has been out. Yeah, that's one less person that's been in that receiving core. But honestly, I don't know that it would matter, because the way it really seems like Rice has filled into that Travis Kelce role, and is just the volume is unbelievable so far this season in an offense that is consistently one of the best in the NFL. I do agree with that. Or are you kind of saying the same thing with the way Rashee Rice is valued?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did a startup draft shortly after last season ended, um, but before we had all of the news of his collision and the
Mhm.
trouble that he got into off the field, and I took him at that point right around probably wide receiver 13 or so. I took him towards the end of the second, middle of the third round, somewhere around there. Um,
Yeah.
and then everything happened, and his value fell off a cliff, right?
Yeah.
Um, understandable. I mean, young player uncertainty. Uh, we've seen this happen in the past where uh, you know somebody like an Andy Reid says, "Okay, well, yeah, you're a good player, but if you're not going to play for us, then we'll find other options." They sign Hollywood Brown, seems to depress his value. I was playing a lot of best ball over the off season, and he went from round 2-3 turn pick to around 6, 7, 8, depending on when in the off season. And then he started climbing again when it became clear that he wasn't going to get suspended this year.
Yeah.
And so right now I've moved him up, and he's my wide receiver 8. I would feel wholly comfortable taking him probably in the second round of a startup draft. But there is some risk, I think.
Mhm.
I think you were mentioning this to me that the Chiefs, or well, in Mahomes in particular, right? His average depth of target has dropped precipitously this year, which is really a function of the offense. Um, and so there's risk that, as Worthy develops, because he's running about 70% of snaps, and he's if rookies kind of hold to how they generally work towards the end of the season, they'll gain some opportunities and volume. So if he starts to gain more opportunities, and Kelsey, wakes up from his long slumber,
His Eras tour.
maybe this is a high point for Rice. And so that's something to worry about. But I see him as, at least for the next 2 years, a foundational dynasty asset.
Yeah. It's interesting because you have that data point from basically right before all that happened. It was before they drafted Worthy also. And you said, like, he was a high-end wide receiver too, and now it sounds like he's even above that after all of that's said and done. So that's a guy that has definitely risen. How about a faller? I don't want to talk too much about Bryce Young because he was kind of already had fallen off, but to go from, he was taken, second in Superflex. He was like the first pick after Bijan in a lot of Superflex rookie drafts, and now 1 year later, he's not even starting for his own team. Kind of tragic how that turned out for him, for the Panthers, for anybody who drafted him. But the one I want to talk about real quick is Trevor Lawrence. What do we do with Trevor Lawrence? I feel like it's kind of been more of a slower. It's been a slower train wreck with him than it was with Bryce Young, where a lot of hype coming out of college, number 1 overall pick, and now we're however many years in, and we're just waiting for him to be that top tier quarterback that we were promised in a way. So where are you with Trevor Lawrence? Do you think there's a chance he might turn around and maybe we're looking at a buying opportunity, or are you kind of hoping he has one big blow up game this year and then you can sell him?
It hurts me to say, but I feel like it's the latter. He's that offense just looks dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And while I think that part of that is play calling and Press Taylor and Doug Peterson, I think that part of that is coaching. We've had a growing sample of Trevor Lawrence where he just makes mistakes that can't be excused. They just can't be accounted for normally, right? I mean, he's, and it's not the stat end all to be all, but he's currently got a completion percentage of 53%.
which was great in 1983, not in 2024.
Right, but it's interesting, right? Yeah. I mean, he's got a very high ADOT. He's throwing 9 yards down the field, right? Like, on his average depth of target is 9 years. But he's only been pressured on 24% of his dropbacks, at least according to the info that I pull off of, which is from Sports Info Solutions, right? So, it's just, that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
And so he's been pressured 24% of the time, and he's been sacked on 11% of his dropbacks, which means that basically 1 out of every 2 pressures is a sack, right?
Not good.
And that's not all him, but he isn't being pressured all that often. He's holding onto the ball too long. His receivers, I guess, like, part of it's going to be on them as well. it feels like it's the yips to me. You know,
Mm,
the just something is going on in his brain
that's interesting. Yeah.
that is preventing him from taking that next step because it looked like, and last year there was obviously the excuses,
Hmm.
a few inches here, a few inches there. Calvin Ridley catches a few passes, and we're talking about him differently.
Yeah.
And I, as well as almost anybody that I was following, was saying, you know what, I'm in on the Jags this year. I think that this is going to be a year for them.
Yeah.
Um, but maybe what we were seeing before then is actually the truth. And so, um, if I see a couple blow up games, I'd probably look to see if there's some willing buyers. The other thing that I think would give me an opportunity to push the sell button would be a change in coaching staff, right? The question is, does that happen? I mean, I saw Doug Peterson got asked if they were going to change the play calling situation, and he gave a one-word answer, which was no. And right now, that doesn't seem tenable. They're making silly mistakes. So, yeah, I mean, it's either a blow-up game to give me an opportunity to sell, or a change in coaching, where maybe I'll give it a few games to see if something changes. But right now, I'm pretty worried. The only thing that saves it is that he signed that big contract.
Right. Yeah. And the competition within the team right now is Mac Jones, who looked even worse when he got into the game the other night. Yeah, you can kind of throw that Buffalo game out, I guess. I mean, that game they lost control of that game so quickly. He did have a really nice drive to start the second half, I believe, where he kind of looked like, you see that's kind of the frustrating thing is you see these like flashes of the player that he could be, and then that window closes and you get games where I think was it week 2, more than half their plays were for negative yards or something like that. Like
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
like, and then you see the stuff where people are comparing Trevor Lawrence's career to this point to Daniel Jones's career at this point, and like Daniel Jones is better. like just looking at the numbers, like Daniel Jones is better, and that is upsetting I mean, that's all from a statistical point of view, but in terms of the eye test, like they don't yeah, I mean, I can't point to times where Trevor Lawrence has been demonstrably better than Daniel Jones. um but he is valued differently, and maybe that's a selling opportunity at this point. But you're right, I mean, a coaching change could help. um he had, I think, 2 head coaches his rookie year, and then Peterson came in his second year, I want to say. um and now, Peterson's in his third year with Trevor. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence is only in his fourth year, which it feels like he's been in the NFL my whole life. Um, so yeah, I mean, there are these flashes that make you think maybe this guy can turn it around, but there's going to have to be some sort of event to make that happen, and maybe it's a change of coaching staff. Maybe he gets over the yips. We'll see, but yeah, if he has a blow up game, I think that might be your chance. And he had a stretch last year where he looked really good. I was just looking at his stats last year from weeks 11, 12, and 13. He was QB1, QB6, QB5. If he does anything close to that this year, I think I'm gonna look to sell. That just feels like a now might be the year to get out from under his poor play. Um, all right. Well, that was kind of a downer. We talked about injuries a lot. We talked about Trevor Lawrence's career, kind of some sad stuff. Let's end on a positive note here. What is something you think will happen in the next 2 weeks? I want you to make a bold prediction that will specifically help out your teams. So players that you have a lot of in the next 2 weeks. What's a bold prediction that you're kind of like hoping happens?
yeah. So for me, I have probably longer than I should have. I've been a T Higgins stan. I love T Higgins. And he almost had actually a decent game.
He really did. Yeah.
Right.
Very,
Just
very close.
so we might be talking about it differently. But
Yeah.
this is his first game. That was his first game of the year.
Mhm.
Their offense, despite the fact that everybody is saying that they're bad, I was listening to a show today, and Sheil Kapadia from The Ringer was quoting the stat. Basically, they're basically running the fifth best offense, a top five offense by every conceivable metric.
Yeah.
Right? Their defense is trash, which is too bad because Lou Anarumo has been quite a good defensive coordinator. But so I'm pretty confident that their offense is going to keep rolling. And while I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs because it's almost impossible to do so starting 0-3, I think that over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have two wide receiver one games from T Higgins, back-to-back wide receiver one games for T Higgins.
All right.
That's my wish casting, and
Sure.
then
Yeah.
I'll diversify my portfolio a bit after that.
I would be here for that. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you in terms of the Bengals. They're a weird team where they always seem to start out very slow. It's just for some reason the loss to the Patriots seems unforgivable now. They probably should have beaten the Chiefs, and then the Commanders might be really good. So these losses might not look so bad in retrospect in terms of real football. But yeah, that offense is cooking a little bit, and they get the Panthers and the Ravens in those two games. So neither of those defenses have looked phenomenal. So that could happen. Mine is going to be that Christian McCaffrey goes to Germany, gets stem cells or titanium or whatever injected into that Achilles tendon, and comes back once he's eligible to come off the IR, and turns my life around a little bit, because it's been dark. It's been dark without him. He was my first pick in Scott Fishbowl this year, and that I am now I 200th from last place. It's not going well, so that's my wish cast. I think mine is a lot more unrealistic than yours, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I hope we're both right. I'll tell you, just for Scott Fishbowl, I had a decent first couple of weeks. I was basically 2-2, because for people that don't know, you play against a league median. But this past week, I chased points, and I started Derek Carr. After not starting Derek Carr for 2 weeks, I started Derek Carr, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed.
Rashid.
Well, let's just say that I got beaten by about 75 points this week, and
Olave was okay, but that 0 from Shaheed hurt a lot of people that were feeling really good about that pick this week.
Absolutely. So, but hopefully, bluer skies are ahead.
Yeah, I think so. Well, this was fun. Be sure to subscribe and listen to Once Upon a Sunday. That's the podcast that I'm on occasionally. Great people there. Sean from Once Upon a Sunday is ranked 27th on Scott Fishbowl right now. So we're mad at him, I guess. But yeah, so thank you for listening, watching, however you consumed this show. We'll be back probably in 2 weeks. We're going to try to do this every 2 weeks during the season. Give you some tips on how to manage your in-season dynasty leagues. So, Aaron, thank you so much. And where can people find you? Are you on the socials? Do you want to plug anything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can find my random reposting of political content and fantasy football content at Aaron Spires, and on Twitter or X. Otherwise, you can't really find me anywhere.
I'm the same. My Twitter is it's a weird mix of the things you just mentioned. It is Derek Adam Thomas on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. And that will do it for the first episode of Too Many Leagues. Aaron, thank you so much, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. Follow on X and Instagram at OUSFFPOD. We'll be back next week for more ways to win your league.